welcome to this panel. We have a group of incredible scholars here who are going to share their research with us, and the area is public administration. And we're talking about inequities, nonprofits, communications, and maybe Indigenous governance if we get that far. We have 4 scholars here. We may be joined by a 5th, but we'll start with the 4 people we have here. So if each of you would be so kind as to introduce yourself, starting with Gul Azfar, please.
Yeah, this is, hi everyone, this is Azfar Go, and I'm the MPA student, Masters of Public Administration, and going to graduate in fall of this year. And my topic of research revolves around the pandemic, like the perceptions of pandemic and essential work and worker struggle and inequality.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Presley.
Hi, my name is Mayona Presley. I'm expected to graduate from the MPA program here at UCO in fall 2022. And the title of my research is the effect of COVID-19 on communication within higher education institutions with faculty, staff, and student organizations.
All right. Ms. Stevens.
Hello, my name is Brianna Stevens. I will be graduating this May from the MPA program here at UCO, and I will be talking about human nature and how that impacts altruism in college students specifically.
Okay, and you'll define altruism for us. Not now, but when we get there. Okay, and Ms. Henderson.
Hi, I'm Paige Henderson, and I am an MPA student graduating in May, and I've done my research on collaborative governance and how that influences outcomes specifically in child welfare in Oklahoma.
Okay, thank you. And we've been joined by Miss Melissa Rosenfelt. So hello, Melissa. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Melissa Rosenfelt. I am a MPA student set to graduate May of 2023. I'm a member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and my project covers McGirt versus Oklahoma, the United States Supreme Court decision over Indigenous sovereignty.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much. So, Azfar, do you want to go ahead and start?
Right, so this is Azfar Go, and my research topic revolves around the during post-pandemic perceptions of essential work, worker struggle, and inequality. So as we know that the pandemic is still going on, and we've been this is the first time we have an exposure to the pandemic, and the essential work, there is no way going around it, those essential workers, they don't have privilege like the work from home, and just stay home, so you have to be over there. And most of the people that suffered are the essential worker. So, and the workers struggle, as the new information is coming from my interview, my study is a mixed study. I'm doing some surveys with the top supervisors and interview with the workers, essential workers. So as the information is coming out, the struggle is real, and the people with single parents, they have a lot more struggles and a lot more challenges. And as talking about the inequality is still going on, since the history, but now the pandemic is highlighting, those things, and the concept of essential work is changing. And these workers are on the front line, they have no choice, and the terminology is changing, and the strategic management theory in the post-pandemic non-erotic world is changing, those supervisors, managers, they can make a difference, to restart the economy. Okay, the pandemic is too much to handle. There's a lot goes over there, and when I say the term essential work, it means those people that we don't even consider essential. And those people are like, like I'm talking about like delivery drivers, truckers, grocery stockers, housekeeping, people working in factories, chicken factories, those chicken cutting factories, they're like thousands and thousands of people. They're like over there and, doing the jobs, and like they put the food like that we get on the table, and learning from the everyone, why this research is important, like the public officials, they can make a difference, managers, supervisors, even the general public, they get the awareness and like to be prepared for the coming pandemic, because we haven't seen the pandemic before, like, so now this is a first exposure. It could be more severe, in the future. So the lawmaker, they can make a difference by doing some favorable policies, and managers, they can appreciate the workers with the tuition assistance, paid vacation, medical, living wages. The most important is the living wages and incentives. So now we are seeing the changing trend, like you see McDonald's and Amazon, they're attracting new employees, and they're like at front, they're telling, and like, the Amazon, like my friends, they're working at Amazon, they're giving you like tuition assistance, paid vacations, medical, living wages. So the bigger picture is like, it takes us all together, like to run the economy. You cannot be like cut off some people, it didn't work like that. So you have to be considerate of everybody, and this struggle is real, and managers, supervisors can learn and plan ahead for future pandemic. New innovations that we've seen during the pandemic, like work from home, like curbside pickups, is still going on, and it's a new things that we are learning as we go. So this ends my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your research in this area, because certainly the pandemic has taught all of us that, like you say, everyone is essential here. And so our perspectives are changing. And I'm sure in public administration, when we think about equity, this comes into play here. Okay, Ms. Presley.
So the title is The Effect of COVID-19 on Communication Within Higher Education Institutions with Faculty, Staff, and Student Organizations. So as a broad overview, I'm wanting to study how faculty, staff, and students perceive communication to be from the university. So there's so many different moving parts in a university, it's almost like its own city. And so I'm wanting to know how, as a conglomerate, they perceive communication to be. Is one group receiving more attention and resources than the other? And does everyone feel connected and a part of the central community? And there's a lot of different methods that the university uses to communicate with the people that they value, and that's the faculty, staff, and students. So for students, there's UConnect, and you can also get on Google and just go to the university's website to find information, but they do have specific portals. So you have UConnect, you have UCOR, and D2L. So all the different ways that they can get communication. And then for faculty and staff, we have the hub, which has all the different resources and tools for us. And so with the pandemic, communication is a large part of the university's, a large part of what makes the university successful. And so when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, it was like a rush, and people were forced to learn technology that they weren't even interested in using. And they were forced to learn how to use it and forced to learn how to lead with it. So for faculty, they were forced to learn how to teach, which is a whole different ballgame than teaching face-to-face. And students had to learn how to learn virtually. And for someone like me, I'm an in-class person, and I learn better when I'm in class. So it was difficult. And then people that actually had COVID, you're isolated. So how are you doing in class and still being able to cope with having the virus? And so with that, it's just difficult. And I'm trying to gauge how students, faculty, and staff feel about being forced into something that we ultimately were unprepared for. And there's a bunch of different leadership theories out there. And so just kind of incorporating those and trying to see how leaders are leading in a new virtual world. And there are some companies and universities that were already teleworking and already doing virtual learning. And so we can learn from them to see what works and what doesn't work. And then as far as the student organization side, student-led organizations are very important. They're important to the university and they're important for the students that are a part of them. And so also focusing on how they stay in compliance, how they get the resources that they need to be a successful student organization. And could even for future research study how student organizations communicate within their own network. And so for this research, I'm utilizing the network leadership theory, which makes sense because there's so many different moving parts at the university. It just makes sense to research how they're communicating with each other, and especially from those in higher level positions. So for example, how are deans communicating with the president of the university? Or how was the communication department getting out information to staff and students? And so for my method, I'm using an interview style survey. So I'm asking specific questions to get the answers that I'm looking to evaluate. And I also offered a text box to give them the freedom to let me know how they feel. Like, what are your actual feelings? Do you feel like you are part of the UCO community, the central community? And so that's overall what I'm looking to see is how faculty, staff, and students feel about communication with higher level positions or higher level of people in the hierarchy at the university.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you and Azfar for both looking at what's happening to us now with COVID and trying to gauge, give us some lessons that we can learn about what we're experiencing as a society. Like Mayona said, forced into something we were not prepared for. And there are larger forces out there that can make us change what we're doing literally on a dime. Okay, Miss Stevens.
So like I said earlier, I'm studying human nature and leveraging natural instincts in order to inspire volunteers. So the reason I'm doing that is I'm highly interested in nonprofit groups, and a lot of nonprofit groups are very specifically reliant on younger students, whether that is college-age students or high school students, in order to run their nonprofit organizations. A lot of the reasons behind that is that a lot of students are required to do nonprofit work, typically for things like scholarships, and working in different student organizations require them to do different nonprofit roles or have a certain number of service hours. So I wanted to look over why people engage in nonprofit work in order to begin with. So like I discussed earlier with altruism is defined as, doing something that is good for another, but is not necessarily good for you. I do have a biology background, so I tend to look at reasons why someone would be willing to risk themselves or risking some of their resources for the good of another. This is something that is very common in a lot of species, specifically in humans. They engage in altruistic behavior for a variety of reasons. Some biological reasons are reproductive success, there is strength in numbers, and typically, especially when you're looking at humans, we are able to look at the benefits of altruistic behaviors and see if it outweighs the cost of doing them. There are also social reasons. Specifically, when looking at young people, you're looking at fitting in with peers. If it is cool to do a certain volunteer assignment, then people are more likely to do it so that they can fit in and they can have that evidence or that role with their peers. In addition, a lot of times it's for getting recognition for their work, and it is for, sometimes it can be for overcoming personal traumas or getting through greater psychological well-being based on helping others. So I think it's really important for organizations, especially those working with volunteers, to look at why their volunteers are performing in these ways and looking at the roots of that altruism and making volunteer work more fulfilling for their volunteers so that they are more engaged and they are more willing to continue to do volunteer work, and to make sure that as the organization, they are serving their volunteers to the best of their ability. Let me see, let me switch. Here we go. So Like I said, I think it is really important for organizations to look at what is actually going to be the most fulfilling for their volunteers and for those who are really the base of all of their organizations. So by looking at all of those reasons, I am going to take surveys of what the perceived benefits of volunteer work are and what actually makes people engage in volunteer work to begin with, and allow these organizations to provide a greater sense of fulfillment for their volunteers and to make the experience more enriching for everyone involved. Like I said, I am specifically looking at college age students. Where I work at personally, I work a lot with college students involved with dance marathon programs and raising money for the local children's hospital. So I think it's really important to look at how we can increase the benefits to those volunteers and ensuring that they are receiving the most that they can out of the experience and ensuring that we are giving them everything that we can. So that is it. And I also have a slide with some references on it.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have a question for you. I'm going to save it for later, Brianna, and I appreciate your research very much, because I think that you are making us look at why volunteers are doing things, and maybe we can figure out, I know that you want to figure out how to make how to enrich the volunteer experience. Okay, Paige, Ms. Henderson.
Hello, so I am Paige Henderson, and I am presenting my research to you on collaborative governance. So what that is it is a structure of government that employs strategies of integration for complex social problems. Integration meaning collaboration with private sector, nonprofit sectors, and the complex social problem in my case is looking at child welfare in Oklahoma. And so I don't know if you guys are from Oklahoma, but in 2012, Oklahoma settled a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit regarding child welfare. Their charge was that there was system neglect of children in the child welfare system. And so part of the settlement was that they had to restructure their government to include nonprofits. They were already including a little bit private efforts, but to include nonprofit efforts in making child welfare better. And so my research question is whether the relationship between Oklahoma DHS and these nonprofits and private partners have improved outcomes for child welfare. And then the second part is this relationship actually collaborative governance? So my mixed study was quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative is including metrics of permanence. So permanence meaning you're providing stability for children. You want to improve, you want to give them a sense of stability. So keeping siblings together, not moving them around to homes, keeping them in child custody, state custody as short as possible, and then hopefully reuniting them with their families or maybe adopting them to stable families. And then also, and then adoption was another permanence metric. So I expected two metrics to go up with the increased involvement of the nonprofit sector. And that would be increasing siblings being together, because RFPs, that's resource family providers, those are the agencies that are outsourcing child welfare. So with their involvement, they are helping to recruit more families, and they have the ability to be a little bit more attentive to families that they are caring for. So I expected that kind of stability to increase sibling groups staying together and to increase adoptions. And then I expected placements per child to go down, because that would show that there's more stability for the child and that they would spend less days in foster care. Either they would be able to reunite with their families or they would be able to be adopted out. And then the qualitative component of my study looked at whether this relationship is collaborative governance. And I sent out a survey to all the resource family provider agencies. There are 17, I got 11 responses back. And so I surveyed their perceptions of their relationship with DHS, because that says whether it is really collaborative governance. It's not really about intentions, it's about really perceptions. And then I also surveyed, I didn't have a lot of contacts within DHS, but I was fortunate to get contacts with the people that are running DHS. So I got the director of DHS and the director of child welfare, and then another director of data collection of child welfare. And they responded to my survey to tell me what their perception is of their relationship with resource family providers. And so I will say that I did not get the outcomes that I expected. I expected more favorable outcomes, but this is a really wicked problem. So you really have to attack child welfare from a lot of different angles in order to see improvements, and RFPs are just one component of this solution. So the number of placements per child, that was too small of a number to really measure. The number of days in foster care, I expected that to go down. It actually went up. But when I talked to one of the directors in DHS, she said that because they've made a great effort to take less children out of homes, that means that a higher percentage of children in care have really awful situations, and it's a very complex problem. And so it just takes longer to settle these problems and bring stability into their lives. And so they end up in the system longer as a percentage, if that makes sense. And then the sibling group staying together did not really change much, but the adoptions did improve to a statistical degree. They did go up as RFP involvement improved. So yes, outcomes increased, or they did improve, not as much as I expected, or not in the same direction I expected in the case of days in care. The second part of my hypothesis was that yes, outcomes would increase or improve, but that it would be due to collaborative governance. After I looked at my surveys, I found that collaborative governance kind of might be more on a spectrum. I had some responses that were very disfavorable. I had some responses that were very favorable, like they really are collaborating. They are meeting with DHS. DHS is listening to them. They are seeing improvement. And then I had a lot of people, and then I had a lot of responses in the middle that were saying kind of their responses seemed more indicative of a public-private partnership, but not necessarily collaborative governance. So they were satisfied with that relationship. It doesn't sound like they expect a lot with a collaborative relationship. And let me explain really quick to you what collaborative governance really looks like. So it is a collaborative force. It does entail like a general system context, meaning you've got three entities. You've got your government, nonprofits, private organizations, and then you have rules that you are following. You have formalities that you follow. You have group dynamics. There should be trust. There should be mutual respect. There should be knowledge sharing. You have capacity. There's no point in bringing anyone to this picture if organizations don't really have the capacity to do the work that they say they're going to do. You also should have organizational autonomy. You don't want organizations agreeing to work with DHS, but then they have to sacrifice on their mission, and they are not allowed to carry it out the way that they created their mission for. You have a virtuous cycle, which just means that they listen to one another and they negotiate and they settle problems by talking about their problems and what can be a better solution and working towards that. You have the longevity in collaborative governance, because if these problems were so easy and they could be solved short, then there would be no point in even collaborating. And then you have incentive. And one of you mentioned incentive in your research, and in other words, that people need to have a reason to want to work with DHS, because sometimes it's just easier to work alone. And so incentive meaning, hey, if we work with them, we can improve child welfare outcomes. It might be more difficult in a way, and we might have to be flexible on the way we carry out our mission, but these kids are worth it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Paige. This is a lesson itself in public administration. Appreciate that very much. Okay, Ms. Rosenfelt, please.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Rosenfelt, and my poster is covering the United States Supreme Court decision of McGirt versus Oklahoma. This court case stems from a 1997 hearing of Jim C. McGirt. He was found guilty in Wagner County District Court He is a member of the Seminole Nation, Muskogee Nation tribes, and he was found guilty in a district court. He petitioned and appealed to the state Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court to overturn his, or to reevaluate his court decision based on his tribal citizenship and the issue of tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction. This court case stems from the 1827 historic treaties that were signed by tribal nations and with the United States government. This court case examines the tribal jurisdiction of these court cases, as Congress has never disestablished tribal lands in the state of Oklahoma, meaning that jurisdiction falls to the tribes of Oklahoma. Each individual tribe is unique in this case, as it depends on the historic treaties and how they were written and how they were agreed to in the issue of jurisdiction. This court case did give sovereignty and jurisdiction to the Muskogee Creek Nation, as Congress never disestablished those. And so what happened is they did rule in favor of McGirt, and also in the case of Sharp. And the answers that were given by the court says that because Congress has not said otherwise since the signing of these treaties, they hold that the government does belong, or the jurisdiction does belong to the tribal jurisdictions. It also involves the Major Crimes Act of 1885. And what that means for us today is that any crimes that do occur on these tribal lands will fall under the jurisdiction of the tribal court system. Each tribe is different in that aspect, as if they do have a tribal court system. Most of them do. The ones on this map, most of them do have a court system, and they are seeking to hold jurisdiction and try court cases that do involve non-native people committing crimes against Indigenous people while they are on these lands. As you know, there are current court cases involved with the McGirt versus Oklahoma decision. They will continue to reevaluate this decision, but unless Congress does rewrite or rescind the treaties, this United States Supreme Court decision will stand. The state of Oklahoma has tried to clarify and pull back jurisdiction from the tribes, but with the lack of precedents involved with its decision, it doesn't look like that the state will have much standing to reclaim that jurisdiction. So what this means is that now that this decision has been made, tribes do have the option to hold court cases in their own tribal courts of non-natives who do commit crimes. And it won't be like small crimes like misdemeanors. It will be like violent cases or domestic cases that do involve violence against Indigenous people. So as we go on from here, we probably will be seeing more tribes trying cases in their court systems, and that will fall under federal jurisdiction and not state jurisdiction. It will be, most tribes do hold their court system on their lands locally, so local cases will be tried at the court system, not cases from out of state. It will only involve cases within state on their ancestral lands. In fact, right now, there are a few tribes. The Quapaw Nation is asserting their jurisdiction and prosecuting crimes of violence against Indigenous people. This will also assist with the current MMIP movement, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women movement, as there are violent crimes being committed against Indigenous women. So this court case is very helpful in prosecuting cases that have gone unpunished or have been let off without any prosecution towards violent crimes against women. So this landmark decision is very meaningful and impactful to each tribe, as each tribe has experienced moments of violent crimes against their people. So this is a win for us, and it's been a court case that will impact us from here on out. And again, it will take acts of Congress to rescind the treaties. But with the decision, it stands now jurisdiction is federally, falls under tribal jurisdiction. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate that and appreciate the insights you're providing into a case that I think the state government has made more controversial from their perspective than it actually is, and we may get to that. I would like to ask you, panelists, do you have any questions of each other about anything you've learned today or anything you'd like to see explored further?
I had a question for Melissa. Have other states picked up on this? Because I know this is not just a problem in Oklahoma as far as violence against women. Are there other states that have, like Nevada, or states that have other tribes that are now appealing on the basis of the Oklahoma decision?
Yes, North and South Dakota have had a long history of battling court cases. As you know, with the DAPL movement and the Keystone pipelines that are going through these lands, it's more of an environmentally centered focus. But yes, this McGirt versus Oklahoma case is very historic and does set precedents. So other tribes are examining their treaties on what it clearly says, but they have to look at the wording very carefully when they approach this topic. But yes, there are other states that are looking into their tribal jurisdictions.
Okay, I have a question for both Azfar and Mayona in terms of you're dealing with COVID and helping us understand some of the ramifications of what we're going through. And as Azfar pointed out, that essential workers were not really highly regarded before COVID, underpaid, overworked, and then then what they were doing became so apparent to the nation that it was essential that in some places laws were actually passed that essential workers had to go to work, whereas others could protect themselves and stay home. So essential workers ended up on the front lines in this pandemic. And it was a travesty before we understood some of the parameters about the pandemic and how to protect ourselves from being infected. At the same time, as Mayona points out, institutions like universities, which Mayona, I think it's interesting you said the university is like its own city. And I thought that was perceptive because the university does declare a lot of internal sovereignty over issues and has multiple moving parts. And sort of everyone had to adapt to this new situation. So based on your research, both of you, what recommendations do you make for us moving forward?
I think for me, like I would like to say, like I think it has make us aware and be prepared for the future pandemics. You know, like more focus on more savings and like be prepared, like how to deal with the future pandemic. Like it goes for like everybody, like, you know, like the general public, lawmakers, and the politicians and the supervisors, you know, to plan ahead so they know like how to manage the future pandemic. So they have plans, you know, like different planning ahead and like all the things that they need, you know. So what to expect, like, you know, it might be more severe, like as we see the future trends, like the climate changes and stuff like that. So the natural disaster might be more severe in the future. So we have to be prepared ahead, like everybody, and like the lawmakers and the supervisors, they can make a difference, by, passing favorable policies, favorable laws, and like at least considerate of the average people working in those in that situation, to at least they should have like living wages. So the bottom line is the living wages and incentives to survive.
Okay, for them and their families.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Mayona, do you have any insights you could share with us?
Yeah, so my suggestion for everyone would be to have some grace. Leaders have grace for those that you're leading, and then those of us that have leaders have grace for your leaders, because we are all just trying to figure it out. They're trying to find their leadership, their management style, and we're just trying to figure out technology, work, life, and home balance, and students are trying to figure out virtual learning. So having some grace for each other when it comes to things like that. And just like we kind of did at the beginning of this, just be patient with each other when we're trying to figure out how to share our screen and how to record this Zoom. So things like that. And then for students, I would say find what works for you, because we have options now. And not even just for students, we have options now. And we know that we can do things virtually, and we know that we can do things face-to-face. So if face-to-face doesn't work for you, you have an alternative. So don't be afraid of something different, and don't be afraid of the technology, because it's there and it's only going to improve from here on out. And like Azfar mentioned, be prepared, because we had no idea that the pandemic was going to cause all of this. So just imagine what can come from this. Practice your emergency management skills, like be prepared for whatever, and be also be willing to try something new, and have grace for others when we're all trying to figure out what's going on here.
Okay, so be more understanding and tolerant as we try to figure out what's going on. And certainly, I agree with you that the pandemic has really shown us that students have many more options in terms of ways to learn and the ways to obtain degrees and get certification. And what Azfar said about providing a living wage is really important. And I think this is also tied to supply chain problems. There's going to be big consideration in the United States about, and I think it's already going on, in terms of rebuilding our manufacturing base so that we're not cut off when something like this happens. Okay, Brianna, my question to you is, because I just learned this morning, globally, 20,000 volunteers from around the world with military expertise and training have come to Ukraine and joined and many from the United States, and joined the Ukrainian Territorial Army. And they've got apparently some units in this fight that are just made up of Americans, made up of people from other parts of the world. So what does this tell us about volunteerism and altruism?
I think a lot of that can really boil down to the fact that humans, especially altruism in its definition, is about being selfless, disregarding all of the negative impacts that it may have towards yourself. And so I think that a lot of that comes down to just human nature. It is kind of on a basic human nature level, looking out for one another, and humans tend to really stick up for people. And I think that especially as Americans, we tend to want to look out for, the underdog or the little guy, and we always want to make sure that we're helping in any way that we can. And so I think that, especially when looking at like what I'm researching, like how we can continue to engage especially young people in fighting for other people and making sure that we're going out of our way to take care of others and not get so self-centered. Because I think that a lot of times, especially younger people, get a bad rap for being too internally focused and being too about themselves. And so I think that especially situations like this and all like following through the COVID pandemic and all of that, like you all have mentioned, has really shown how much people are willing to go out of their own way to help out others.
Okay. Gosh, I really appreciate your bringing the pandemic into this, because we've got many people, yes, who went out of their way to save lives, to provide services for others. And now we're seeing people flocking to Ukraine, and these are volunteers in the field who are willing to risk their lives. We also have other people around the planet who are raising money. And we have countries like the United States. I think we're going to be taking 100,000 refugees. And just want to remind everybody, we're a huge country. We have a lot of unused capacity in this country. So I always look forward to days when this country opens its borders and allows people in. And I wish this would also spread to people from south of the US border who have a lot to offer and should also be allowed in. Okay, Paige. I think this research is just fantastic. And because you are highlighting a real complex problem in an agency that really hasn't met the needs of people in Oklahoma. It's taken court cases to try to get it up to speed. And it's sort of child welfare. If we can't take care of our kids, who are we taking care of here? Because our kids are the future. And sort of, I think it was interesting, it took a court case to make them use the services provided by nonprofits, when across the country, that was sort of standard for child welfare agencies. So it just amazes me. And it's sort of like, is this a class issue? In the sense that the people involved who need these services or who have used these services, people that have been in foster care, people that have depended on the larger society once they're adults, they're not, it seems to me they're not included in the conversation here when these decisions are made. Mm-hmm. And people maybe who are very middle class and who don't have to deal with these issues are are making these decisions when they've never lived this life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They have created several collaborations now. Like this is just one collaboration, but there's others on different layers. Like they collaborate with they collaborate with OU to run. I don't remember what it's called, but like a group that is trying to meet more with foster parents and be more available to foster parents and listen to them about problems in the system or just challenges that they're facing to try to make a service delivery better and more considerate of these kids. And that it is a hard problem and it's hard to keep families. Families have a lot of burnout and they're trying to create a system that is more family friendly, that considers the challenges that these families are facing so that they will keep hosting children. It's just been, and it's not a problem totally isolated to Oklahoma, although we've definitely been in the limelight. We are doing some things better. Like I was looking at, there's this report that comes out like every 4 to 5 years and they compare all of the states. And so we are not doing as well in some areas, but in other areas, we're doing better than other states. And one of the directors that I interviewed or surveyed, she wrote back that she does think it's because we are trying to collaborate as a state more with other organizations. And that's why we're seeing better outcomes long-term. Short-term, there are still some hiccups to overcome, but long-term it is improving. And I heard a lot from several nonprofit organizations how much better it is to work with the director of DHS and that he is really listening and trying. And then the director of DHS and the director of child welfare, they seem to have a really good partnership. And there were several leaders that expressed feelings of, okay, we're on the right course. And that was reassuring to me.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I really hope both you and Brianna continue your research in the directions you're going into, because I think you're providing a lot of insights here that we can use moving forward. Melissa, in terms of McGirt versus Oklahoma, okay, why is it that the state never respected these treaties?
I think one of the reasons is there's a lot of misconceptions on tribal governance. It's not common knowledge to know that each tribe has its own court system or even its own law enforcement system.
Yeah.
So I think we're battling with historic misconceptions or misunderstanding or just lack of information, or education. So I think it became a battle because, the way it's worded, it kind of sounds like, oh, the tribes are just gonna, let, crime happen and run rampant, and that's not always true. For instance, my tribe, the Seminole Nation, we have our own law enforcement team, the White Horsemen. And what they patrol the territories, they respond to calls and medical emergencies, they're a service to the tribe and tribal members. So I think, it was controversial because not all the information is commonly known. And in reference to the treaties, not everyone knows what the treaties entail. They not only did the treaties, they were written up in exchange for ancestral homelands. So, and the government, United States government, came up with these treaties that gave tribal jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction in exchange for these homelands, and the tribes received health care, our own tribal governance, our own sovereignty. So I think, the state, they want to maintain that cohesive law enforcement specter across the state, but they just don't know how to work alongside or collaborate with individual tribes. And each tribe is different. So it's layers upon layers of how to approach it. And the state just needs a little more practice or information, cohesiveness on how to work with individual tribes. And, from here on out, we're definitely going to have to learn how to work together in law enforcement and in the law and in the court system. Because if we don't, we could have people fall, between the cracks and have violent crimes never answered for. So it's good for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous because it builds a cohesive law enforcement agency across the state, and then no one will fall between the cracks. There'll be justice for everybody.
Okay, I appreciate your answer. And I also think that you are being very kind to a state, which I have see as just really being blatantly racist and exercising power since 1907, when Oklahoma became a state, through ignoring these treaties. And there's a lot of practice, there's a lot of literature out there with law enforcement agencies working with other law enforcement agencies and courts working across jurisdictions. So it's not as if, they have to build these structures from scratch, because there's entities out there globally that are doing this. So I think that optimistically, the state can draw on this to learn how to be a partner, a respectful partner in these processes. The other thing that, when you were talking about, I know what MMYW is. What is MMYP?
The MMIP is Missing and Murdered Indigenous People.
Oh, okay.
It's to be inclusive across all genders, non-binary or fluid genders. So the people is for everybody. It's, because a lot of our males go missing and children go missing. So it's the MMIP is just an inclusive I hate to say label, but it's inclusive anagram for everybody.
Oh,
We don't
okay,
want anyone to go missing and not missed. So it's
right, and not be missed. Yeah, very good. Okay,
I have a
one
question.
thing I've
I have
learned
a question.
recently. What?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Can I ask Melissa a question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so reading Killers of the Flower Moon, I'm wondering about, so in that time, I think that was in the 1920s, was murder of Indigenous people ever considered a tribal issue? Because, or was that a state issue as soon as Oklahoma became a state? Because it took the federal government to get involved only after they realized that the state wasn't doing their job. But I mean, did the Interior never control tribal lands?
In that era, that's the reason why we do have an issue with the federal, because back then, you know, the Indigenous people, the Osage Nation was definitely under federal jurisdiction, but there was it was handled by non-Indigenous entities that really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it until, you know, these several murders started happening, you know, because of oil and mineral rights and land rights. So back then, you know, it was kind of an ignored issue until it could no longer be ignored. So, you know, and today, a lot of these agencies are Indigenous ran, like the BIA, for example. It's more commonly associated with Indigenous people than non-Indigenous people. So back then, the agencies were ran predominantly by non-Indigenous people with a not so kind agenda.
Yeah.
But you know, and times have changed now. So now that we are getting attention on so many of these issues, it is from an Indigenous perspective and not a non-Indigenous perspective. Does that answer your question? Oh,
You're muted.
Did the state, as soon as Oklahoma became a state, is that when a lot of this got kind of confused, because the government of Oklahoma took over any homicide case? Did they ever let the Osage government, did the Osages not have much of a government at that time, so it became a state issue? Because now I know you guys do have, I mean, every tribe has their own government, right?
most of them do. Most of them do. And it does vary tribe to tribe on how widespread their governance is. Some of them is very small, like the Apache Nation, very small, and you know, not a lot of power behind it. But then you look at the Chickasaw Nation, where they have a lot, or even Cherokee Nation. So back then, yeah, the statehood definitely did confuse it, and every treaty was different. So really, they have to go back and look at their treaties. But back then, it was under federal jurisdiction, but I do believe the state, become in statehood did cause an issue, especially with the land run, because that caused confusion. We had non-Indigenous people trying to take Indigenous land that were promised. So yeah, that jurisdiction did get fuzzy, and it still is to this day. We're having to look at each tribe individually.
That does help. Thanks.
Okay, Melissa, something I learned just recently. Okay, most of the societies we're talking about are matrilineal versus Western societies, which are patrilineal. Heritage goes through the father, through the men, whereas in matrilineal societies, the organizations differ. And so when women are attacked and killed and disappeared, that literally is genocidal, because that wipes out a whole family line. Okay, that's something that we may explore more.
Something I'd like to add on to that is the issue of blood quantum. A lot of tribes have to adhere to a blood quantum for enrollment. And that also is a patriarchal and colonialist ideal. And
Right.
it's also a use of genocide, because that limit, as the maternal side continues, your enrollment falls under your maternal side most of the time. So the use of blood quantum was established by the federal government, that in order for a person to be enrolled into a tribe, you had to have a certain amount of blood quantum. And as people move and marry outside of their families, that blood quantum gets strained, and that's a usage of eliminating or decreasing enrollment numbers for tribes, which in turn decreases their indigenous sovereignty and their presence. So, that is also another issue I think that ties into that. So blood quantum is a very sensitive issue and falls along that genocidal ideology.
Right. And these colonial practices have just been put in place with impunity. I think it's helpful to also remember that the treaties were signed in different eras and different periods with different actors representing the federal government, representing the tribes, and that's part of the reason they're different. Each treaty is different and requires scrutiny from that perspective. Okay, folks, I want to thank each of you for the valuable research that you're carrying out. And we, the society as a whole, are the beneficiaries of your work. So I want to thank you. The university wants to thank you. We appreciate this. And our video is going to be open and shared with the students and the faculty. And if you get an email from somebody, a student or faculty, asking about this, please be generous with your answer to any questions that they may have about your research. So moving forward, I wish each of you a great day, and I want to thank you very much. And I'm going to end this now. So goodbye, everyone, for now.